Why did the laughter cut so sharply when she pulled the patch from her vest? That was the question no one at the range could answer in that breathless moment. They had mocked her for being quiet, for being small, for being, at least in their eyes, just another contractor pretending to belong in a place built by warriors. But when the Delta Force insignia glinted in the Georgia sun, silence fell over Fort Bennink's firing line like a curtain. Captain Harrison's smirk froze. The men who had joined in his taunts suddenly studied their boots. Only Emma Lawson kept her eyes on the weapon in her hands, as if she hadn't just set the air on fire with a single, simple reveal. Her hands didn't tremble from fear. They never had. The faint shake was restraint, restraint that had kept her alive for years, restraint that kept old instincts buried under the mask of a gunsmith. She let the moment pass without explanation, without satisfaction. She returned to her work, tightening a bolt, checking the chamber, ignoring the weight of eyes that now refused to meet hers. She had spent 5 years cultivating invisibility, and in less than 10 seconds, that patch had threatened to shatter it. By noon, the sun pressed down like a punishment. Georgia heat clung to skin, heavy and unrelenting. Around her, Fort Benning buzzed with its usual rhythm, rifles cracking on the range, clipped orders barked by instructors, the metallic percussion of magazines snapping into place. To the outside eye, everything was routine. But for Emma, nothing ever was. Every movement she made was deliberate. Each step was measured, her gaze sweeping corners, exits, reflections in glass. She was never just in a room. She was in a plan, always rehearsing a way out, always calculating the next 3 moves, as if a firefight could erupt at any second, even in the safety of an American base. At her workbench, tools were laid out in a way that looked chaotic to everyone else. A mess, Harrison had once sneered, but the distances weren't random. Each wrench, each pin punch, each oil bottle sat precisely where she needed it to be. 5 years had perfected the system. 5 years of careful order, because order meant control, and control kept the ghosts at bay. Sometimes. She was 34. Her hair, blonde now, always tied in a severe ponytail, had once been darker when she lived under another name. Her body was strong, built from miles of running, hours of drills, scars of another life, but she dressed in clothes that hid it all. Oversized shirts, baggy trousers, boots worn down with routine. Beauty was a weapon she had long since laid down. Her face rarely smiled, her voice rarely lifted above technical explanations. Barrel wear, trigger pull, chamber scoring. It was safer that way. The men around her dismissed her as the weird contractor, the one who never came to happy hour, the one who slipped into the night to run the perimeter road while others drank and laughed. 3 miles every evening, one for Thomas, one for Michael, one for Benjamin. The ghosts always ran with her. Her hands told their own stories if anyone cared to look closely. Calluses too thick in the wrong places. Not the hands of someone who simply repaired rifles. These were hands shaped by gripping a weapon for thousands of hours, hardened by fast stroping out of helicopters, marked by days and nights lying in sand, stone, mud. The body remembers even when the mind begs it to forget. But she never explained. She never shared. She kept her silence, and silence became her shield. That morning, Harrison had loomed over her. His shadow stretched across her bench as he spat words like poison. Think you can handle that? Or should I get someone with actual combat experience to take over? Emma's only response had been the tightening at the corners of her eyes, the smallest betrayal of her control. She had replied flatly, "Yes, sir. 1,400 hours." And then she had turned back to her work, refusing him the satisfaction of a rise. But she had felt it, the old burn in her chest, the dangerous pull to answer fire with fire. 5 years of restraint, and still one man's taunt could make her fingers twitch toward a weapon she no longer carried. Around her, the others pretended not to notice, pretended not to hear, pretended not to feel the tension ripple like static across the workshop. But Sergeant Jack Morgan had seen. He had seen the way she moved, the way she handled the rifles, the instinct beneath the routine. Combat recognized combat, even when dressed in contractor's clothes. Where'd she come from? he had asked Rodriguez, one of the older armorers. Rodriguez had shrugged. Been here 5 years, papers say private contractor, doesn't talk much, fixes anything that crosses her bench, better than anyone I've seen. Harrison hates her guts. Some say because he asked for a man and got her. Some say he just hates women. Morgan had watched longer, watched the way she scanned the exits, watched the 1,000-yard stare flicker when she thought no one noticed. He knew that look. He had worn it himself. It wasn't something you could fake. It was the look of someone who had seen too much, survived too much, and carried too much. By midday, Emma had repaired 8 rifles, perfectly, efficiently. Her pace never faltered, her breathing steady as a metronome. But when Harrison returned, this time dragging a cluster of younger officers with him, the rhythm changed. His voice carried across the room like a showman presenting an exhibit. "Gentlemen, this is what happens when the Pentagon prioritizes quotas over competence," he declared, gesturing at Emma as if she were an object, not a person. "Lawson here probably learned everything she knows from YouTube." A ripple of uneasy chuckles spread through the group. Emma didn't lift her eyes. She kept working, her silence louder than any defense could be. Harrison leaned closer, his words sharp enough to cut. The armory used to be sacred ground. Now they let anyone in. One young lieutenant shifted, uneasy. "Sir, with respect, those rifles look properly serviced." The room froze. Harrison's head snapped toward the lieutenant. His voice was a whip. "When I want your opinion, Lieutenant Davis, I'll ask for it." Emma finished the 9th rifle, set it aside, and reached for the 10th. Still, she said nothing. Her control was iron, but inside her chest, something hammered against its cage. Harrison grabbed the rifle she had just finished, yanked the charging handle, peered into the chamber with exaggerated scrutiny. He wanted failure. He wanted proof, but there was nothing to find. He slammed the weapon down harder than necessary. "Lucky repair, don't get cocky." Then he turned and left, his entourage trailing behind him, the silence of the room swallowing his retreat. Only then did Emma release a breath. Her hand shook as she reached for the next tool. Not fear, not anger, just the effort it took to hold the ghosts inside. That night the ghosts came anyway. They always did. At 3 in the morning, like clockwork, she woke gasping, her body rigid, heart slamming against her ribs. The nightmare always played the same. Sand, blood, the weight of Thomas's body across her shoulders. Michael and Benjamin's rifles cracking in the dark until they fell silent. The taste of copper. The mountain pass where shadows moved like water. The decision. The promise. The failure. She rose, dressed, and ran. 3 miles in the humid Georgia night. One for Thomas, one for Michael, one for Benjamin. The ritual never changed. The guilt never lifted. By dawn, she was back at her bench, as if nothing had happened. But every night the case under her bed waited, a steel box filled with truths she never spoke, shell casings etched with dates, a knife worn smooth, dog tags that weren't hers, a vial of sand, and a Navy SEAL trident modified, engraved with 3 names: Thomas, Michael, Benjamin. The weight of it cut her palm when she held it, a reminder of who she had been. Chief Petty Officer Emma Ghost Lawson, first woman to complete Bud-S infiltrator, operator, team leader, the one who never lost a man until that mission. Ghost had died on that mountain. Only Emma remained. And she would stay invisible as long as the world let her. But invisibility never lasts forever. Why did Frank Carter watch her so closely? That was the question that pressed against Emma's thoughts the following morning, though she would never let it show. The man was older, Vietnam era, his hands scarred by decades of steel and gun oil. Most of the contractors treated her with a kind of wary distance, but Carter was different. He studied her the way a surgeon studies a wound, not with suspicion, with recognition. He approached her workbench when Harrison wasn't looking, his voice pitched low. "He's on the warpath today. Brass visiting from D.C. He's looking to make an example of someone." Emma's hands never stopped moving, aligning the bolt carrier, checking tolerances, tightening with measured precision. She didn't look up. "Thanks." Carter hesitated, his weathered face unreadable. "Some of us are meeting tonight. Legion Hall, 2000 hours, you should come." Emma finally looked at him, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. Legion Hall meant veterans, not weekend soldiers, not recruiters, operators, people who carried the same calluses, the same ghosts. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. Social gatherings were risk. They asked questions. They looked too closely. And yet, Carter's tone hadn't been casual. He wasn't inviting her for company. He was inviting her for a reason. She didn't answer. By the time she looked up, Carter had already walked away. That afternoon, Harrison paraded a group of Pentagon visitors through the armory like he was a ringmaster. His voice carried, polished, dripping with the weight of his service record. "Some of our personnel," he said, letting his eyes linger on Emma, "lack the combat experience this role once required." One of the visitors, a stern-faced woman with a colonel's insignia, frowned. "She seems efficient," the colonel said. "Her technique is excellent." Emma kept working, her movements as controlled as ever, but the name stuck in her mind. Hayes. She'd heard it before, years ago, whispered in corridors where operators weren't supposed to overhear. Hayes had been one of the architects of the female integration program, one of the few who believed Ghost could be real. The moment passed. Emma returned to her work, but unease gnawed at her edges. The walls of her anonymity were never as thick as she believed. By nightfall, the decision had already been made inside her, though she pretended otherwise. She parked at the Legion Hall with her car positioned for a quick exit, scanned the perimeter, noted exits, cover positions, cars that didn't belong. The habits never died. Inside, 12 men sat in a circle. Their eyes turned toward her with the kind of attention only warriors gave. No judgment, just assessment, measuring, calculating. "This is Emma Lawson," Carter introduced simply, "from the armory." A gray-haired man with the swimmer's build of a seal tilted his head. "Not many armorers handle weapons like you do. Most read manuals. You handle them like you've fired thousands of rounds." Emma met his eyes without flinching. "I've had good training." A ripple of quiet laughter circled the room. They weren't mocking. They were acknowledging. "You clear rooms before you enter," the man continued. "You keep sight lines to all exits. You run 3 miles every night no matter the weather. Old habits." The room fell quiet. Denying it would only make her a liar. She measured her words carefully. "Old habits," she said finally. Carter leaned forward. "Everyone here has old habits, that's why we meet. It keeps us anchored." Emma's gaze swept the circle. Now she saw it, the way they sat, the small tells, the scars, operators, every one of them her people. The realization settled heavy on her chest. "Why am I here?" she asked flatly. The swimmer's build man exchanged glances with Carter. "Because Harrison's attention isn't random, and you deserve to know why." Captain William Harrison's office was as immaculate as his posture. Photographs lined the walls. Him as a young lieutenant in Desert Storm, as an intelligence officer in Afghanistan, as a commander with medals gleaming against his uniform. But his eyes, even in the photos, hardened with each passing year, as if the weight of service had calcified something inside him. Every morning before anyone else arrived, he unlocked the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out the same photograph. A young man in desert camouflage, smiling beneath the Afghan sun. His nephew, Thomas. Another year without answers. Another year without him. He poured a glass of bourbon, raised it in a silent toast, and swallowed it in one long pull. Lawson, the name haunted him. For 5 years she had worked under his nose, silent, competent, never giving him the crack he needed. The Pentagon thought she was a model contractor, but he had seen something in her from the moment she walked onto his range. Something too precise, too familiar. He had tried to break her with scorn, with assignments, with humiliation. Nothing worked. Her silence was impenetrable. But his instincts screamed. She was connected to Thomas, somehow. When Sergeant Morgan delivered range reports that morning, Harrison's ears sharpened at the name Lawson. She diagnosed a defect in the M4 gas tubes, Morgan explained. From sound analysis, saved us from a lot of failures downrange. Sound analysis, Harrison repeated. His voice dripped skepticism. From a contractor with no combat experience. Morgan shifted uncomfortably. With respect, sir, her technical skills are exceptional. Harrison waved him away, but his jaw clenched. She wasn't just technical. She was hiding something, he knew it. Back at his desk, his eyes returned to the photograph of Thomas, 26 years old, killed in action during a mission still redacted beyond recognition. The official report said ambush. The truth was buried under layers of classification. Only one survivor had returned, a survivor whose name was blacked out of every file Harrison had ever pulled. But in his gut, he already knew who it was. That night Emma stood in her apartment, staring at the steel case beneath her bed. Her hands hovered before unlocking it. She had avoided it all week, avoiding the storm that always followed. But Carter's words, Harrison's hostility, Hayes's stare, they had stirred the ghosts too close to the surface. She opened it. The casings polished smooth from years of handling. The knife, the vial of sand, the photograph of 4 teammates in desert camouflage, arms around each other, smiling beneath the Afghan sun. Ghost team. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin, and her. Her hand found the trident, modified, engraved, heavy with the weight of 3 names, her brothers, her responsibility. The memories surged like a tide. Somalia, Syria, Afghanistan, nights when Ghost had been unstoppable, a shadow through hostile cities, a sniper through blinding sandstorms, a leader who had never lost a man until that mountain pass. She closed her fist until the metal bit her palm. Pain anchored her to the present, reminded her who she was now. Ghost had died in Afghanistan. Emma Lawson remained. She locked the case, slid it back beneath the bed, and forced her breathing steady. Another day awaited her, another day of silence. But silence doesn't last, secrets never do. And Captain Harrison wasn't finished. What was Harrison really after? That question gnawed at Emma as she tightened the strap of her toolkit the next morning. Range Charlie wasn't her usual station, yet the assignment sheet in her hand bore his signature. 9 a.m. sharp. Bring tools. It wasn't a request, it was a summons. She arrived early, always early. The range was already buzzing, officers forming a half circle, eyes bright with curiosity. Harrison stood at the center like a conductor, his voice carrying with that polished, venomous authority he wore like armor. On the table lay a rifle, not just any rifle, an SR-25 sniper system. Her weapon, the one she had carried in deserts and mountains, rainstorms and firefights. "Miss Lawson," Harrison said, too smooth, too loud, "we'll have a little demonstration today." Emma stepped forward, toolkit balanced in her hand. She saw the trap instantly. The SR-25 had been tampered with. The wear was wrong, the damage too deliberate. He rigged it, sabotaged it. He wanted her to fail in front of an audience. "Take your time, sweetheart," Harrison sneered. "Thinking isn't your strong suit." A ripple of uncomfortable chuckles moved through the crowd. She ignored them. She ignored him. Her world narrowed to the rifle, to the familiar weight of it in her hands, the click of the charging handle, the whisper of metal on metal. Her fingers moved as if guided by memory, by thousands of hours with this exact weapon. Bent gas tube, compressed spring, scored chamber, stress fractures on the mount, sabotage layered upon sabotage. She cataloged each failure aloud, voice even, unflinching, her hands moving with the confidence of lived experience. Silence, absolute silence. She had seen it before, the way soldiers looked at each other when someone revealed knowledge they weren't supposed to have. Recognition, unease, respect. Harrison's jaw clenched, his face flushed. He tried to twist it, tried to claw back control. "Lucky guesses," he muttered. But he had seen it too. The ease, the instinct, the danger. And for a flicker, Emma let it show. Her hand tightened around the torque wrench, knuckles whitening, shoulders shifting, breath slowing into the controlled cadence of pre-combat. For a heartbeat, death had entered the circle, wearing her face. Harrison flinched, stepped back without meaning to. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew. Then, with visible effort, she released the tool, her hands trembling slightly with restraint. She documented the rifle's faults as if nothing had happened, as if the predator hadn't just pressed against the bars of its cage. The demonstration ended in uneasy silence. Harrison had wanted humiliation. Instead, he had revealed something else entirely. Something none of them could unsee. From the far side of the range, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wilson watched with the kind of attention that missed nothing. He wasn't young anymore. His hair carried the salt of years, his eyes the shadows of classified missions. 20 years in naval special warfare had taught him to spot patterns most men missed, and what he had just seen set every instinct buzzing. The balance, the way she moved even when kneeling, weight perfectly distributed. The flinch at the sound of a Black Hawk overhead, specific, precise, not random startle but conditioned memory. The hand signals she used with another armorer, not standard Army gestures but the subtle variant developed in SEAL teams. Wilson knew ghosts when he saw them. That night he sat in his office, door locked, terminal secure, fingers hovering over a keyboard that could open files most officers never dreamed existed. He hesitated, because searching meant breaching layers of classification, meant stirring waters better left still. But he searched anyway. Female operator, call sign Ghost. The screen filled with blacked-out lines, redactions heavy as stone, but fragments bled through. Bud S. completion, first female graduate. Somalia 12 hostage takers, silent elimination. Syria 23 contractors pulled from the jaws of death in a sandstorm. Afghanistan, multiple classified missions, final entry, Operation Iron Shield. 4-person team, 3 KIA, 1 survivor. The survivor's name, redacted. Wilson leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't need the name. He had already seen the truth in the way Emma Lawson gripped a torque wrench. He had found the ghost of Coronado hiding in plain sight. That night, Emma sat on the edge of her bed, the steel case open before her. The trident rested heavy in her palm, engraved with the names that never let her go. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin. The ritual was the same. She let the memories come until they nearly drowned her, then pressed the pain back into its compartment. Ghost was gone, she had buried her, but the cracks were spreading. Harrison's taunts, Carter's recognition, Wilson's eyes on her, Hayes's inspection. The walls were closing in. And she wondered, how long until someone forced her to answer? Captain Harrison, meanwhile, poured another bourbon. His office lights burned late, his desk littered with files. For years he had requested her transfer, his memos ignored, his warnings dismissed. They didn't see what he saw, the mask she wore, the silence that wasn't submission but concealment. And now, after today, he was certain. She wasn't just some contractor, she was the survivor, the unnamed ghost from the mission that had killed his nephew. He stared at the photograph of Thomas, the boy who had called him Uncle Will, the boy who had written letters home about fishing trips they'd take after deployment, the boy who had bled out in a mountain pass while someone, this woman, walked away alive. Harrison's grip tightened around the glass. He had spent 5 years searching for the truth, 5 years clawing at classified walls, and she had been here all along. Tomorrow, he promised, tomorrow I break her. But Emma wasn't alone anymore. Carter had seen the flinch, the near slip at Range Charlie. He knew what it meant, and he knew the cost of keeping it buried. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, he approached her bench. "You okay?" he he asked, his voice quiet, eyes sharp. Fine, she replied, the word clipped. He didn't believe her. He leaned closer. Last time I saw you, you were leading Bud-S candidates through close-quarters drills at Coronado. You moved like a shadow. They called you Ghost. Emma froze, her mask almost cracked. You're mistaken. No, Chief, Carter said, deliberately using her rank. I was there, instructor rotation, I remember. Her eyes locked on his, reading him the way she once read targets through a scope, measuring threat, intent, weakness. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Because Harrison isn't just some bitter old officer, Carter said. Thomas Anderson was his nephew. He died on Iron Shield. Harrison thinks you hold the answers. He's not going to stop. For a moment, pain broke through her mask. The name hit like a round to the chest. Thomas, her brother-in-arms, the man whose blood had soaked her hands while he whispered his last words. She turned back to her tools, her voice low, controlled. They died because someone made a bad call. That's all Harrison needs to know. But Carter shook his head. You're not running from him, you're running from yourself. Emma's jaw tightened. I'm honoring a promise. The conversation ended there, but Carter knew the storm was coming. And storms had a way of tearing masks away. Why did she let him follow her into the maintenance room? Emma asked herself the moment the door clicked shut behind them. She had spent 5 years avoiding confrontation, hiding behind silence, controlling every breath. But when Harrison had dropped the photograph of Thomas onto her workbench in front of everyone, when he had spat the name like an accusation, Thomas Harrison Anderson, her control had cracked. She could not allow the ghosts to be dissected in front of young officers, not with curious eyes watching. So she had stood, shoulders squared, and led him here, away from the crowd, into privacy, into danger. Harrison closed the door hard, the folder clutched in his trembling hand. His face was flushed, jaw tight, voice low and raw. 5 years, he said. 5 years I've been searching for answers about my nephew's death. 5 years, and you, his voice broke. He pushed through it. You were there. Emma's eyes stayed steady, though her pulse hammered beneath her calm mask. This isn't the place for this conversation, Captain. The hell it isn't, he snapped. He dropped the folder onto her desk. Photos spilled out. Grainy images of a 4-person team in Afghanistan, faces blurred by redactions but unmistakable to him. Different hair, civilian clothes, but the same person, Chief Petty Officer Emma Lawson, Ghost. The name landed like shrapnel. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. You survived, Harrison said, voice rough. 3 didn't, my nephew didn't, tell me why. The room was silent but for the hum of fluorescent lights. Emma's eyes closed just for a second. She could still feel Thomas's weight across her shoulders, still hear the gunfire echoing through the pass, still taste copper in her mouth. When she spoke, her voice was quiet. We were betrayed. Harrison blinked. What? The asset was a double agent, she said, each word measured, carved from years of silence. The extraction point was an ambush. Thomas took a sniper round. Michael died covering us. Benjamin bled out on the rocks. I was ordered to carry out the mission regardless. I recovered the intel package and was pulled out alone. The truth dropped between them like a live grenade. Harrison staggered back a step, his face tightening as the words dug into him. You're saying someone knew. Emma's eyes locked on his. Someone always knows. Someone always decides what's worth losing. He collapsed into the chair opposite her, the folder sliding to the floor. His anger was gone, replaced by something heavier. Horror, grief, recognition. I was intelligence division then, he admitted, voice hoarse. Not directly involved in Iron Shield, but part of the machine that sent you there. I thought it was bad intel. I thought it was chance, not betrayal. Emma's face was unreadable. We all carry our ghosts, Captain. Mine just have names. For the first time in 5 years, Harrison's hostility cracked. His voice dropped to a whisper. I've spent every day hatting you, believing you left him, that you, his throat closed on the word. And all this time. Emma looked down at her hands, scarred, calloused, trembling with restraint. His last words weren't about me. They were about you. He told me to tell Uncle will he finish the mission. The air left Harrison's chest like a blow. His shoulders sagged, his composure breaking. For a long moment, the 65-year-old officer shook with silent sobs, 5 years of grief finally breaching its walls. Emma watched, her own face hard but her eyes wet. I couldn't bring him home, she said softly. Taliban cut off the route. Their bodies were never recovered. I had to leave them behind. Harrison lifted his head, eyes bloodshot. You lived to expose it, to make their deaths mean something. She shook her head. I lived so the file could vanish into classification, so the men who signed it could be promoted, so families could be handed redacted death certificates. The silence was heavy. Two veterans, two survivors, two sides of the same wound. I blamed you, Harrison whispered, when I should have blamed the system. Before Emma could answer, a knock hit the door. It opened before she responded. Lieutenant Colonel Wilson stepped inside, his expression grave. Captain Chief, Colonel Hayes requests your presence at headquarters. Immediately. Emma's head turned sharply. I have no connection to any. Wilson cut her off gently. She has level 10 clearance. She's read the unredacted file, and she believes it's time you both knew everything. Harrison frowned. What else is there? Wilson's gaze flicked between them. You'll want to hear this together. The ride to headquarters was silent. Emma sat rigid, her hands still, her eyes locked on the window. But her mind was calculating routes, choke points, exits, contingencies. It was instinct, unshakable, as natural as breathing. Harrison sat across from her, hands folded tight on his knees, eyes lost somewhere far beyond the van's metal walls. His anger had drained, but the grief remained, etched into his posture. Wilson rode with them, watching, guarding, perhaps preparing for something neither of them could see yet. Colonel Catherine Hayes was waiting in a secure conference room, her presence commanding the air. At 62, silver hair drawn back tight, her gaze sharp enough to cut, she radiated authority. Not the loud kind, but the kind that made men twice her size lower their eyes. Chief Lawson, she said, voice calm but firm, welcome back. Emma's chest tightened, the rank, the recognition. There was no point pretending anymore. Beside Hayes stood a man Emma hadn't expected to ever see again. Hello, Ghost, he said. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Michael Rivera. He was older, scarred, his right leg favored slightly, but his eyes, the same intelligent, steady eyes, locked onto hers, alive. You're dead, Emma said flatly, her voice betraying nothing though her heart had clenched like a fist. Rivera gave a half-smile she remembered. Reports of my death were not entirely accurate. Harrison's eyes widened. You, his voice faltered, you were on Thomas's team. Rivera nodded once. Communications, Ghost Team, officially KIA, obviously not. Emma stood frozen, her mind processing, compartmentalizing, refusing to let emotion override discipline. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years I carried your name with theirs. 5 years believing, she stopped herself. Rivera's face shifted, guilt flickering in his eyes. It wasn't my choice. I woke up in Bagram after multiple surgeries. By the time I was conscious, the record had been sealed. They told me you resigned, that you didn't want contact. Operational security, they called it. Emma's hands tightened at her sides. Her voice was like steel. While I lived with the guilt of leaving you behind. Hayes stepped forward before the tension could rupture. Sit, all of you. They obeyed, though Emma positioned herself where she could see both exits. Always. Hayes activated the secure lock on the room. The walls hummed. The lights shifted. What I'm about to tell you remains classified at the highest level, she said, but you deserve the truth. Her eyes swept them. Operation Iron Shield was compromised before it began. The CIA asset codenamed Jackknife was a double agent. Certain elements within Intelligence Division suspected it. Your team was sent in anyway, not despite the risk, because of it. Emma's jaw tightened. Harrison's eyes darkened. Rivera sat forward, his face grim. "You mean we were bait?" Emma said flatly. Hayes nodded. Expendable, to test Jackknife's loyalty, to confirm duplicity one way or the other. The orders came from the highest levels, CIA Operations Director and Deputy Secretary of Defense Richard Palmer. The name was a blade. Harrison flinched, the horror settling in. Palmer was my superior. He signed Thomas's condolence letter. Palmer still sits in his chair, Hayes said coldly, promoted for decisive leadership. Emma's composure nearly shattered, but she held the line. So Thomas died so Palmer could confirm a theory. Hayes didn't deny it. For the first time in years, Emma felt the weight of rage she had buried ignite inside her. But Rivera's voice cut across it. Palmer isn't alone. He's part of a shadow structure, Phoenix Dawn. They operate inside legitimate agencies, bending missions for political and personal ends. Iron Shield wasn't the first. It won't be the last. Emma's mind clicked through the pieces with tactical speed. Betrayal, sacrifice, layers of lies, a system willing to bleed operators dry for shadow wars. And sitting in that sterile room, with Harrison's grief, Rivera's resurrection, Hayes's fury, and Wilson's watchful silence, she realized the ghosts she carried weren't hers alone. For the first time in 5 years, the cage she had built around herself cracked wide open. Why was it always the silence after the briefing that felt heavier than the words themselves? Emma sat rigid at the end of the conference table, eyes fixed on the blacked-out files Hayes had left before them. The others, Harrison, Rivera, Wilson, had gone still, each lost in their own fracture of the truth. But Emma's silence was different. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. 5 years she had spent burying ghosts. 5 years clawing her way into anonymity. And now the past sat across from her, staring her down in the form of Phoenix Dawn. Hayes broke the silence first. Her voice was calm but sharp. "You've all been kept in the dark for a reason. Phoenix Dawn isn't a rogue element, it's a sanctioned parasite, a shadow council pulling strings inside official channels. Iron Shield wasn't failure, it was success to them. They confirmed their assets' loyalty. They tested how far they could bend the rules, and 3 operators died for it." Rivera leaned forward, fists tight, and the survivor, his eyes cut to Emma, was left to choke on the fallout. Emma didn't flinch. "I made my choice," she said quietly. "I carried out the mission. I left the men behind." Rivera's voice sharpened. "That wasn't your choice, Ghost. That was theirs, Palmer and his handlers." Her jaw clenched at the call sign. Ghost. It felt like a wound reopening. Harrison's voice was rough, ragged with grief and anger. "If Phoenix Dawn exists, then Thomas's death wasn't war. It was murder." Hayes met his eyes. "Yes." The word hung heavy in the room. Emma forced her breathing steady, forcing discipline over the storm inside. "Why now?" she asked. "Why tell us now after burying this for years?" Hayes's expression softened. "Because Phoenix Dawn isn't finished. They're positioning assets for something bigger, something stateside. And Lawson," she hesitated, then spoke carefully, "they fear you. You're the only operator who can expose their pattern. You lived it. You're the crack in their wall." Emma's stomach tightened. "I'm not part of this anymore." But Hayes shook her head. "You never stopped being part of it. They made sure of that. Your silence has been their best protection." Emma's eyes dropped to her hands, scarred, restless, still trembling from restraint. She thought of the steel case under her bed, of the trident engraved with 3 names, of Thomas's last words. "Uncle Will tell him I finished the mission." Her chest ached. She wanted to stay invisible. She wanted to run. But invisibility had a price, and it had already been paid in blood. After the meeting, the corridors felt narrower, the fluorescent lights harsher. Rivera caught up to her near the exit, limping slightly, his face etched with years of pain and secrets. "Emma," he began. She stopped him with a raised hand. "Don't. You can't carry this alone anymore," he pressed. "They're counting on your silence. That's why Palmer let you disappear, because you disappearing is safer than you speaking." She turned on him, eyes sharp. "And what would you have me do? Kick down doors, burn files, watch as another generation gets buried while the machine chews on?" Rivera didn't back down. "I'd have you do what you always did, fight." Her voice dropped to a whisper, raw and unguarded. "I buried 3 men in a pass I couldn't get them out of. I don't fight anymore." Rivera's gaze softened. "That's not weakness, that's grief. But grief doesn't erase duty. You taught me that once." For a heartbeat she almost broke, almost let the pain spill over, but she forced it down, forced the mask back into place. "Stay out of my way, Michael." She walked away, each step heavier than the last. Harrison, meanwhile, sat alone in his office, the bourbon untouched for once. He held the photograph of Thomas in one hand and Hayes's file in the other. For years he had hated Emma, blamed her, sharpened his grief into a weapon aimed at her silence. And now the truth lay bare. Thomas hadn't died because Emma left him. He had died because men in suits had decided a life was expendable. And Harrison, for all his rank, for all his medals, had been powerless to stop it. He felt the shame like a weight pressing his chest. The uniform on his shoulders suddenly felt like a costume stripped of its meaning. He whispered into the silence as though Thomas could hear him. "I was wrong, about her, about everything." The admission broke something inside him, but in the shards of it something new flickered. Not revenge, not anger, a kind of clarity. If Palmer was untouchable inside the system, then the fight had to come from outside. And that meant standing with the woman he had despised. Emma returned to her apartment that night, her body moving through the motions like muscle memory. She checked the locks twice, scanned the windows, swept the hall before entering. Old habits, necessary habits. But when she dropped her keys onto the counter, her eyes fell immediately to the steel case under the bed. The case that had waited 5 years. She sat on the floor, pulled it out and unlocked it. The trident, the casings, the knife, the photograph, the vial of sand. Her hand lingered on the photograph, 4 faces frozen in a moment of light. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin, herself, smiling, believing, whole. Her throat tightened. She remembered Benjamin's jokes, Michael's calm under fire, Thomas's determination. She remembered the night before the mission when they had sworn in hushed voices that no one would be left behind. And she remembered breaking that vow. Her fingers closed around the trident. Cold metal bit into her palm. "You left me behind," Michael's voice echoed in her head, though she knew he had never said it. "You walked out of that pass alone." She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing the thought away, but the guilt coiled tighter. Was Hayes right? Was Rivera right? Was silence just another form of betrayal? The answer came not from her, but from the world outside. At 300, her phone buzzed with a secure alert. Carter's voice, tense and clipped. "Emma, they're moving. Phoenix Dawn operatives hit a weapons depot 2 hours ago, disguised as contractors. They're loading munitions onto unmarked trucks." Her chest tightened. "Where?" "Savannah docks. Coast Guard's been told to stand down. Orders came from D.C." Of course they had. "Emma," Carter pressed, "if those shipments leave, they disappear into the system. No paper trail, no oversight. They'll vanish and God knows where they'll end up." Her eyes flicked to the trident in her hand. The engraved name seemed to burn against her skin. She had promised herself Ghost was gone. She had promised herself she would never fight again. But the silence had broken. "Send me the coordinates," she said, her voice steady. "I'll be there." She moved like she hadn't in years. The kit she swore she'd never touch again was pulled from the false panel in her closet. Black fatigues, lightweight body armor, a suppressed sidearm. Her hands moved with muscle memory, swift and efficient. Every buckle, every strap, every weapon checked twice. When she looked at herself in the mirror, the reflection was both familiar and alien. The same cold focus in the eyes, the same predator's calm. Ghost, staring back at her from the glass. She hated it, she needed it. By the time she reached the docks, the night air was heavy with salt and diesel. Floodlights cut across stacked containers. Unmarked trucks idled near the water. Men in contractor gear moved with too much precision, too much discipline. Not hired hands, operators. Phoenix Dawn's muscle. Emma crouched in the shadows, eyes scanning, mind calculating. Routes, guard rotations, blind spots. She mapped it all in seconds, the way she once mapped villages in Afghanistan, the way Ghost had lived. Her pulse steadied, her breath slowed, the old rhythm returned. For the first time in 5 years, she felt alive. And terrified. Because once Ghost returned, Emma Lawson might never find her way back. Why did the night feel so familiar? Emma crouched in the shadows of the shipping yard, the tang of salt and diesel thick in her throat. Floodlights carved harsh lines across the stacked containers, and the rhythmic grind of cranes overhead set her nerves buzzing with memory. She had been here before, not here in Savannah, but here in this moment. Alone, watching, calculating, preparing to step into the fire. Her hand brushed the trident tucked into her vest pocket. A ritual, a promise, a burden. 3 names pressed into the metal, burned against her chest. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin. Their ghosts always walked with her, but tonight they felt closer, like they were watching, like they were waiting. Through her scope, she studied the men moving crates from the depot to unmarked trucks. Contractor gear, unremarkable, but the way they moved told another story: tight formations, disciplined sweeps, hand signals stripped of wasted motion. Operators, not military, not contractors. Phoenix Dawn. She counted 12 visible, 2 on overwatch, likely more in the shadows, each one trained, each one ready. She whispered to herself, steadying her breath. One target, one plan, no improvisation. But even as she said it, she knew plans rarely survived first contact. The first shot was not hers. A floodlight shattered with a crack, sparks rained onto the asphalt, shouts rose, men scattered for cover. Emma froze, scope sweeping. Not her shot, someone else was here. And then she saw him, Rivera, limping but steady, a suppressed carbine in his hands, moving like the years had never passed. He had ignored her warning. He had come anyway. She swore under her breath. Phoenix Dawn operatives were already converging on his position. He would be pinned in seconds. The choice pressed on her like a vice: stay hidden and keep control, or break her vow and step back into the fight. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The ghost returned. Her first round dropped the lead man in the squad, sweeping toward Rivera. The second clipped another through the throat before the body hit the ground. She was already shifting, already calculating the next angle. Rivera glanced up through the chaos, his eyes locking on hers across the yard. No words, just recognition. The machine inside her whirred back to life, a rhythm she had sworn she would never feel again. Her breathing slowed, the world narrowing to angles and timing, light and shadow. But the ghosts whispered in every pause. 3 died because you lived. She silenced them with fire. The fight unfolded in brutal fragments. Trucks roared, headlights cutting across the yard. Men shouted in clipped codes. Suppressed fire cracked, sharp and deadly in the humid air. Emma moved low and fast, weaving through shadows, her suppressed pistol snapping twice, 3 times. Each shot clean, efficient. No waste. No noise beyond the dull thud of bodies falling against steel. But Phoenix Dawn wasn't green. They adapted quickly, shifting formations, sweeping arcs. Whoever commanded them had drilled them hard. This wasn't a raid. It was a test, a message. Rivera fought like a man with something left to prove. Each burst of his carbine bought seconds, space, but his limp slowed him. Emma covered him, frustration tightening her chest. He shouldn't have been here. Then she saw it, the crate being loaded into the central truck, markings she recognized instantly, stamped not with army codes but with initials buried deep in her nightmares. CIA property. She hissed into the comm clipped to her collar, patched into Carter's frequency. They're not stealing, they're moving, internal transfer. Palmer's fingerprints are all over this. Carter's voice came back, static-laced but urgent. Copy. Coast Guard reports incoming, but their orders are to escort those trucks, not stop them. Her stomach knotted. Phoenix Dawn wasn't hiding. They were operating in plain sight under official cover. This wasn't theft. It was deployment. Her mind raced. She could kill every man here and still lose the shipment, unless... Her eyes swept the yard. Then she saw it, the crane overhead hoisting containers like toys, and the fuel tank near the trucks, half hidden in shadow. Risk, high, collateral, the kind of call Ghost had been forced to make before. She hated it, she needed it. Michael, she hissed into her comm, 2 minutes, keep them busy. He didn't argue, just answered copy. She climbed the crane like she had climbed cliffs in Syria, her body remembering every hold, every shift of weight. From the cab, she yanked open the manual controls, ignoring the alarm screaming in red. She swung the container overhead, slow at first, then faster, aligning it with the trucks below. Shouts rose. Phoenix Dawn operatives spotted her, rifles snapping rounds against steel. Sparks sprayed. She ducked, heart pounding, but her hand stayed steady. One mistake and the container would drop wide. She waited, breath locked, until the lead truck pulled forward beneath her. Then she released. Steel screamed. Gravity tore the air apart. The container slammed into the truck, crushing it like a tin can. Fire bloomed, rolling across the yard, igniting fuel and munitions alike. The shockwave rattled her bones even from the crane's perch. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled, shouting, firing wildly. Rivera limped into the smoke, his silhouette cutting through the firelight. He dropped another operative, then another, covering Emma as she climbed down. For a heartbeat, the yard was hell. Fire, smoke, bodies shouting, the acrid stench of burning fuel. And in the middle of it, Emma felt the old calm. Not peace, never peace, but clarity. Ghost was alive. By dawn, the fires were under control. The Coast Guard had cordoned off the area, their faces pale as they watched the wreckage smolder. Emma stood at the edge of the pier, soot streaking her face, her gear heavy with ash. Rivera leaned against a railing beside her, exhausted but alive. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes," she answered, "I did." He studied her, his eyes tired but certain. "Ghost is back, whether you like it or not." Her jaw tightened. "Ghost is a curse." Rivera shook his head. "Ghost is the only thing they fear." Behind them, Carter approached, phone in hand, expression grave. "News is already spinning it. Official report says a contractor team prevented a terrorist theft at the Savannah docks. They're painting Phoenix Dawn as foreign infiltrators. Palmer's people are burying it fast." Emma's stomach sank. Of course they were. The truth was ash before it even cooled. Carter lowered his voice. "But the explosion shook them. You disrupted a sanctioned op. Palmer will come after you." Emma turned to face the rising sun, her face hard. "He already has." The wind off the water carried the faintest scent of smoke. She inhaled it, let it burn her lungs, let it brand the night into her memory. The ghost had returned. But the price was already waiting. Why did the sunrise feel like a countdown? Emma stood on the pier long after the flames had dimmed, long after the Coast Guard dispersed. The Savannah air carried the acrid tang of charred steel and fuel, the sound of gulls circling overhead. She had thought the fire would bring relief, but instead, It felt like the opening volley of a war she hadn't agreed to fight. Beside her, Rivera limped, his weight resting against the railing. Carter lingered a few paces back, scanning the horizon the way old operators never stopped scanning. 3 figures against the dawn. Survivors, witnesses, targets. Emma knew it without saying. Phoenix Dawn wouldn't let this go unanswered. Palmer had spent 5 years burying Iron Shield. He wouldn't allow Ghost to rise again. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted message, short, precise. "They know, leave now." No sender, no trace, just the warning. She slid the phone back into her pocket, her jaw tightening. She didn't tell Rivera or Carter. Not yet. They already knew without hearing it. By noon, Washington was spinning Savannah into theater. Networks showed charred trucks, blurred bodies wheeled away under tarps, officials in polished uniforms delivering lines crafted by lawyers. Attempted terror theft, civilian heroics, ongoing investigation. Not one mention of Phoenix Dawn. Not one admission that the operatives carried clearance codes, not foreign passports. Harrison watched it all from his office, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles blanched. For years he had trusted the system, believed his nephew's sacrifice fit within a ledger of necessary costs. But watching Palmer's people rewrite the truth in real time, he understood the machine wasn't just broken. It was designed this way. He poured no bourbon, he wanted no numbness, he wanted clarity. His phone buzzed, a private channel, Hayes's voice taut with urgency. "Harrison, Lawson's in danger. Palmer signed a covert order this morning. She's designated an unauthorized combatant, meaning she has no protections. If they find her, they'll erase her and no one will ask questions." Harrison closed his eyes. For 5 years he had hated Emma. For 5 years he had sharpened his grief against her silence. But now the truth was clear. The machine had killed Thomas, and it would kill her too unless he acted. He stood, his decision made. Emma didn't sleep. She sat in her apartment with the steel case open before her, its contents spread like relics of a past she had sworn to bury. The trident, the casings, the photograph. Each piece was a weight, an anchor, a reminder. She polished the knife with slow, steady strokes, not for use, for control. Her hands needed work to keep the storm inside at bay. At 200, headlights swept her window, too steady, too synchronized. She killed the lights, moved to the back exit, pistol already drawn. The door barely opened before the first round slammed into the frame. Suppressed fire, precision. Phoenix Dawn had come. Her body moved before thought. Drop low, sweep left. 2 rounds fired blind into the alley. A body fell. She vaulted the back fence, landing hard, rolling into the shadows. They had her building surrounded. No warning, no negotiation. This wasn't arrest. This was erasure. She ran not to escape, to buy time. The streets of Savannah blurred past, lit by sodium lamps, slick with late-night drizzle. Her breath stayed steady, her legs moving with trained efficiency. Every block she shifted direction, cutting angles, forcing pursuit into confusion. But Phoenix Dawn was an amateur. They mirrored her moves, boxed her in, funneled her toward the docks, toward containment. At the corner of River Street she saw the SUV too late. Blacked out. Government plates hidden under mud. Doors flew open. Men poured out, rifles raised. She dove, rolling behind a planter, rounds shattering brick above her. Her pistol barked twice precise, dropping one, staggering another. But numbers pressed in. Then headlights flared behind her, tires screamed. An old pickup barreled into the SUV, ramming it sideways, metal screeching against concrete. The driver's door burst open. Harrison stepped out, shotgun in hand, his face a mask of grim resolve. "Get in," he barked. Emma didn't hesitate. She sprinted, sliding into the passenger seat as Harrison fired a single booming round, scattering their attackers. He gunned the engine, the truck lurching forward into the night. For a long moment, The only sound was the roar of the engine and their ragged breaths. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice flat. "Why?" Harrison's eyes stayed on the road, jaw tight. "Because I blamed you for 5 years. But the truth is, you were the only one who didn't betray him. Thomas trusted you. That's enough for me." Emma stared ahead, the city lights blurring past. "You're late." "Better late than never," Harrison muttered. They regrouped in an abandoned warehouse outside the city, Carter and Rivera already there, grim-faced. "You were followed," Carter said. "They'll follow again," Rivera added. Emma set her pistol on the table, her voice hard. "Then we stop running." Carter raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like Ghost talking." Her jaw tightened. "Ghost doesn't exist, not anymore, but if Palmer wants a war, he'll get one. And this time the truth doesn't die with us." Rivera leaned forward. "Then we go after him." Emma's eyes flicked between them. Carter's steady calm, Rivera's fire, Harrison's grief-turned resolve. For years she had carried the ghosts alone. Now, for the first time, she wasn't alone. But the weight of it didn't ease. It doubled. Because if she stepped back into this, if she became Ghost again, she would drag them with her. And men who followed her had a way of not coming home. She looked at the trident on the table, the engraved names burning under the dim light. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin. Her voice was low, steady, final. "We hit Phoenix Dawn at the source. No more shadows, no more silence. We drag the truth into daylight." No one argued. Palmer poured his scotch with the calm of a man who believed he was untouchable. His office in D.C. glowed with the city's night skyline, the monuments gleaming like trophies of permanence. Reports of Savannah lay neatly stacked on his desk. Controlled narrative, media spin, no leaks. The machine worked as it always had. Yet his jaw tightened as he read the last line of the field report. "Subject Lawson, alive, escaped pursuit." His hand gripped the glass tighter. He had underestimated her once. He would not again. "Ghost," he muttered, the name dripping with disdain. He turned to the window, staring out at the capital he controlled with invisible strings. Find her, end her, and make sure the ashes scatter too far for anyone to follow. Behind him, the city buzzed, blind to the war already moving in its veins. And Ghost, whether she accepted it or not, was already in his sights. Why did the city feel different when you knew its secrets? Emma stood at the edge of the Potomac, the Capitol dome glowing faintly through the mist, monuments reflected in the dark water. To the world, Washington was a symbol of order, permanence, democracy. But to her tonight, it was a battlefield wrapped in marble. Behind her, the team gathered in silence. Rivera checking his weapon with the quiet efficiency of a man who had waited too long for this fight. Carter watching angles, always scanning, always guarding. Harrison leaning heavily against the hood of the truck, his face hard, his grief sharpened into steel. They had no unit patch, no chain of command, no sanction, only a mission. Phoenix Dawn thrived in shadows, so tonight they would drag it screaming into daylight. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Palmer's compound outside Arlington wasn't labeled as his. To the world, it was a secure intelligence annex. Inside, files, servers, and the men who protected them. The proof of Iron Shield, the proof of every manipulation since. "Once we hit it," Carter said, his voice low, "they'll throw everything at us. We won't get a second chance." Emma's eyes stayed steady. "We don't need one." Rivera gave a humorless smile. "That's the Ghost I remember." She shook her head. "No, that's just Emma finally finished running." They breached at 200. The night was quiet, the city asleep, but the compound was alive with guards in contractor black. Suppressed fire cut the silence, Rivera dropping 2 before they could raise alarms. Harrison covered the flank with grim precision, his shotgun booming when quiet wasn't enough. Carter moved with eerie calm, like he'd rehearsed this 100 times. Emma led, every sense razor-sharp, every movement efficient. The old rhythm returned, but it wasn't the same as before. The ghosts were still there, but tonight they didn't hold her back. They steadied her hand. Each hallway bled into the next. Steel doors, stark lights, the hum of servers, Phoenix Dawn's heart. They reached the archive. Hayes's intel had been right. Locked behind biometric scanners, armed with redundancies, the kind of fortress that believed itself impenetrable. Emma stared at the scanner, then at the trident in her hand. Not tonight. Rivera set charges. Carter timed the blast. Harrison braced the door. The explosion shook the compound. The vault cracked open. Inside, rows of drives, servers, paper files stamped eyes only. Proof, enough to shatter careers, topple men like Palmer, drag Phoenix Dawn into the light. But alarms screamed, lights strobed red. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Grab what you can, Emma ordered, moving fast, stuffing drives into packs, snapping photos with encrypted gear. Then the footsteps came, heavy, disciplined, closing fast. Phoenix Dawn had arrived. The firefight was chaos. Corridors lit with muzzle flashes, smoke curling through the sterile air. Emma moved like she had been born for it, pistols snapping targets down one by one, rifles slung and brought to bear when the push grew heavier. Rivera fought beside her, limping but unflinching, each burst of his carbine covering her flanks. Harrison's shotgun thundered, Carter's precision shots cutting through the noise. But for every man they dropped, more pressed in. Palmer hadn't underestimated them this time. He had thrown the full weight of Phoenix Dawn against their four bodies. Emma's chest burned, her arms ached, but her focus never wavered. This wasn't about survival anymore. This was about truth. And then the voice, smooth, calm, amplified over the compound speakers. "Emma Lawson," Palmer drawled. "Or should I say ghost? You could have stayed gone, we gave you that gift. But you couldn't live with silence, could you?" Emma froze only for a breath, then fired another round. "Come face me, Palmer," she hissed. His laugh echoed through the walls. "I don't need to, you're already dead. The system will erase you just like it erased your team. Tonight, you're not soldiers, you're ghosts." The word was meant as a taunt, but Emma felt something shift inside. Ghost. Not a curse. Not anymore. A truth. A name that meant she had survived when she wasn't supposed to, that she carried them all, Thomas, Michael, Benjamin, into every fight, that she refused to vanish. Her voice cut through the gunfire, strong, steady. "Ghosts don't die, they haunt, and I'm not done haunting you." She surged forward, dragging Rivera with her, covering Harrison as he reloaded. Every step a defiance, every breath a refusal. The fight pressed into the control room. Palmer was there, flanked by guards, his suit immaculate, his face calm as if the chaos outside were a mere inconvenience. "You don't win tonight," he said coolly. "Even if you kill me, the machine is bigger than one man." Emma raised her pistol, steady despite the tremor in her arms. "Maybe, but the machine bleeds." The shot cracked. Palmer fell, his calm mask shattering as crimson spread across the sterile floor. The guards faltered, then broke. Without their center, their cohesion unraveled. The team cut through the last of them, breaths ragged, bodies battered but alive. Emma stood over Palmer's body, her chest heaving, her pistol still raised. For 5 years she had dreamed of this man. For 5 years she had buried the weight of Iron Shield under silence. And now here he lay, small, mortal. She lowered the weapon. The fight wasn't about revenge. It never had been. It was about truth. They escaped into the night with the files, sirens wailing in the distance, the city stirring as if it sensed its own corruption bleeding. By dawn, encrypted drives were in Hayes's hands. Secure channels lit up across Washington. Proof leaked, spreading faster than Palmer's people could contain it. Names, operations, patterns, the kind of evidence that couldn't be buried under neat press releases. Phoenix Dawn cracked. and with it the silence around Iron Shield. A week later, Emma stood at Arlington, 3 stones before her, each carved with names she had whispered for 5 years. Thomas, Michael, Benjamin. She laid the trident on the grass, her fingers brushing the engraved names one final time. The weight she had carried pressed against her chest, but for once it wasn't suffocating. It was heavy in a different way. Solid. Real. Rivera stood beside her, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Carter lingered behind them, silent sentinel. Harrison stood alone, his grief quieter now, shaped into something closer to peace. Emma didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence itself was her offering. She closed her eyes, letting the breeze wash over her, letting the sound of the city beyond the cemetery drift through. Ghost wasn't gone. She never would be. But Emma Lawson had finally stopped running from her. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.